to go? Get that tail wagging. Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. Well, the Russians are at it again. They are the biggest mess in the world right now for multiple reasons, but the pandemic is really eating them alive. It's not going well. The virus is winning in Russia. In case you wonder what's winning in Russia, the virus is winning. Good news in the United States, though. We are really looking good. I think it's pretty dramatic when you look at the various states, but right now we're getting down to the point where we can begin to see the end of the tunnel here. I looked at IHME, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation projections, and they are projecting it to really get pretty close to zero, but not totally to zero. In fact, they sort of think it may plateau around 500,000 to 1 million cases a day. The CDC is actually forecasting a little bit better. They're thinking it may end and go down to about 100,000 cases per day. So that would be great, because if that's the case, if you translate that in the United States to how many per 100,000, at the low end it'd be 20 to 30 cases per 100,000 nationally, and at the high end 2 to 300. 20 to 30 cases is actually very, very low. So that would be great for the spring and the summer. You can only hope. Again, looking at Texas, this is January versus March. I mean, tremendous progress. We're down to almost below 10 cases per 100,000, which is really low risk in Dimmitt County. Love Dimmitt County. Dimmitt County still at 80 cases per 100,000. So I don't know. Those javelinas are just, I think we should look at them as a reservoir, because they are just wreaking havoc on Dimmitt County. The good news in the Texas Medical Centers, our numbers are really doing great. Our case numbers down to 670 cases per day last week. We want it to get down to 200, but it's getting there. And our hospitalizations are down to 121 per day. So again, at our low, we were around 40 to 50 cases. So we're getting there. We're not quite there, but things are looking good. And if you look at the CDC, high risk and low risk, green is good, yellow is okay. We're sort of in the yellowish, going towards green in Texas. You can see much of the country is getting better. And the CDC numbers are a little bit delayed in reporting. We get them because in the Texas Medical Center, we share our data on a daily basis. They're a little bit behind, but they have us at about 88 cases per 100,000. We're actually, the most recent data that I just told you, the 670 cases in 700 million. I'm 700 million. In 7 million. We just became the biggest state in the world, country in the world. No, in 7 million is less than 10. And so, CDC came out with their new indicators, the green, yellow, and I don't know, it doesn't look red to me, but orange. And so being less than 200 puts us in the potential to be low risk. And then the percent of staffed inpatient beds being less than 10%, we're at 8%. And then new COVID admissions per 100,000, less than 10 is all green, and we're at 12. So I think by this time next week, we will be all green, which means we are a low-risk community. And that means masks off. So we're really excited about this. I'm finally feeling very positive about what's going on in Texas. They also have some great water surveillance data. If you look at blue dots are where it's going down. We are one of the places where it's going down. We're at 65% of our peak level, so that's great. Now look at water surveillance and where it's going up. Just a few states, Ohio, Illinois, and of course our friends in California. Interesting. San Francisco, the Bay Area is going up. Other parts of Southern California are going up, which is why, of course, Governor Newsom wanted to be the first state to declare it's now officially endemic. Now, I believe he is marshaling his inner Boris Johnson, who was also guilty of partying during the lockdowns. And so he decided he'll come out and we're the first endemic state. And what he's emphasizing is prevention and quick reaction to outbreaks instead of mandating masks, which, of course, hasn't worked for anyone, but good luck with that. And I'm trying to think, what's the analogy for me thinking about California trying to do their own thing? So it reminds me of making an avocado bagel. It's close, but it's just not right. And they're just jumping the gun. So they came up with an acronym called SMARTER: shots, masks, awareness, readiness, testing, education, and the R is for RX, or treatments. And I think that's way too long and cumbersome as an acronym. So I came up for a new one for California. It's called JUMP, as in jumping the gun. Just a few weeks too soon. I mean, they're so close. They could actually do it right, but, they just want to be ahead of the game, So they actually One of the things they're planning on doing is stockpiling 75 million masks. Good idea. Creating the infrastructure to provide 200,000 vaccinations and 500,000 tests, also a good idea. They're going to create a medical group personnel to deal with any surge that might happen. So that's all good, and they're going to start a Mythbusters video, which I also like, to fight misinformation. The problem is they're just doing it too soon. It's like a Boris Johnson. It's not that it's a bad idea. Can you just be a little patient? Anyway, Omicron continues to be the dominant variety. There are 2 mutations of Omicron. And it's a good thing that things are getting better, because you can see the 2 mutations are beginning to expand, but we're in a shrinking pool of available people to be infected. And so I think we're going to be okay for the near term. And if you've gotten out Omicron, your antibodies are effective against these variants. So it's time to start thinking about what was the total impact of the pandemic on the United States. We're up to 950,000 deaths. But the way we do it for flu is we look retrospectively and say, what was the excess mortality? And when you look at it that way, we're well over 1 million deaths due to COVID. So it's a really devastating disease for our country. But the good news is the vaccines. What evidence that the vaccines really worked? Well, the Commonwealth Fund did a projection on what would have happened if we didn't have vaccines. And what they came up with is there probably would have been 10 million more hospitalizations and over another million deaths. So the vaccines were incredibly effective at preventing serious illness and death. So that was all really great. There is some disappointing news, though, because for the pediatric population with the Pfizer vaccine, for under 12, it really hasn't been all that great. And I'm sure this is a dose effect. The New York State Department of Health just came out looking at 850,000 participants, 5 to 17 years of age. And for the 12 to 17-year-olds, it was kind of okay. The vaccine effectiveness declined from 66 to 51%, and hospitalizations from 85 to 73%. But in the 5 to 11-year-old category, it dropped from 68% to 12%, and from hospitalizations from 100% to 48%. And that's almost certainly due to the fact that the dose for under 12 was 10 micrograms versus 30 micrograms in the over 12 and over. And there's a perfect example of the dose effect. In this one study from the New York State Department, they looked at this 1 week, January 24th to 30th, and they looked at the vaccine effectiveness for 11-year-olds and the vaccine effectiveness for 12-year-olds. So the only difference there was the dose. And for vaccine effectiveness for 11-year-olds was 11%, not very good. But for those of 12 years old was 67%. So pretty clearly a dose effect. The good news is that that's easily correctable. They'll just have to add a bigger dose and see whether or not it's safe. And that should go a long way. There was also a CDC MMWR report, very similar data. I won't go over it, but it showed a reduction in vaccine effectiveness for Pfizer in that under 12 age group. So really 2 great papers. We haven't talked about the origin of the virus for a long time, but 2 great papers came out, and this was really kind of a really important study from 20 different institutions all over the United States, Hopkins, Scripps, all over Europe, specifically not the Chinese government, not any Chinese institutions, really trying to trace the origins of the outbreak. And they used spatial analysis and genomic data, and they looked at the earliest cases, the first few hundred cases. And what they determined was that it was pretty clear that those cases, the first 156 cases, emerged from the Hunan wet market. And they traced each one very carefully. And you can see ground zero was the Hunan wet market. They even traced secondary contacts, and again, it was all people who had been contacted by those people who were in the wet market. So, very careful genomic analysis, spatial discussion, many different institutions all conclude was pretty clearly the wet market that was the origin of the virus. And there was a person that was a concerned citizen that took pictures of the wet market. And remember, we've been sort of semi-jokingly talking about all the different species of animals that seem to get coronavirus. We've already talked about hippos, deer, mink, hamsters. We've talked about this the last year and a half. Well, guess what they're selling in the wet market? Well, there's a deer right there, and there's a porcupine, a couple of porcupines, a couple of raccoon dogs. So there's enough animals, and these are live animals. There's enough animals that clearly could be infected with coronavirus. And the authors of this paper were followed by another paper. They were trying to trace the entrance of the virus from animals into humans. And, as I mentioned before, Joe Petrosino's group had looked at the spike protein and that it was 99% closely linked or closely related to the pangolin. But, it's not all that clear because pangolins are generally not sold live in these wet markets. Chinese like to eat the scales. A lot of people like to eat the scales for medicinal reasons, but they're not usually live in the wet markets. So the question is there a second entry? And there was a nice paper looking at the potential that it starts off, of course, in horseshoe bats. That's clear in China. Probably jumped to pangolin and then probably to another animal. It could be fox, it could be the dogs, whatever it is. We need a little bit more evidence, more sequencing in those animals. But it's pretty clearly a zoonosis that jumped from bats to at least 2 species, probably 2. The other interesting thing of this paper was it looked at that there were 2 entrances, 2 different lineages that were infected in the Hunan market. So again, suggesting broad problems in the Hunan wet markets. 2 different entries from an animal to a person, and the reason they know that is the genetics of the virus are slightly different. And then it spread to the community and then internationally. So very interesting studies suggesting that very clearly it's not an outbreak in the labs. This was focused on the wet markets in China. I want to end with some shout-outs. First of all, big shout-out to the rodeo. I mean, we closed the rodeo 2 years ago. It was sort of painful. We in Houston love our rodeo. And so it was hard to do, but, we did it the right thing to do. We avoided the outbreak that happened in New Orleans, for example, during Mardi Gras. So that was a good thing, but we're now open again. And I think it's pretty safe. They're trying very hard to make it safer, increase ventilation. They've actually opened up some vaccine stations, so they're doing a good job. So big shout out to the rodeo. Also want to do a giant shout out to our dean of the medical school. We had a fantastic site visit from our accrediting body, and we did extremely well. So congratulations, Dr. Kristen and her team. And then another shout out to our chair of pediatrics, Dr. Gordon, who did a really great video on the impact of COVID on mental health. So it was a really interesting week and a lot of good things to look forward to. Seems like we're finally coming out of it. I think we'll be in a good lull phase, and then spring and summer. Because immunity wanes, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall and winter. My guess is we'll have resurgence, but for now things are looking very good. And because it is rodeo time, Lily wanted to send her special greetings to everyone because she is heading to the rodeo. So have a great weekend, and I can't wait to see you next week.
Welcome to the Houston Rodeo Championships. Lily Klotman from Houston, Texas.
Here comes Cowgirl Lily on top of her horse. She's cleared the final barrel and she's crossing the finish line with an excellent time. Go Lily! Representing Baylor College of Medicine, next up is Lily. Let's see if she can stay on for her mutton ride. Hang on, Lily, hang on!
Baylor College of Medicine, that is the Blue Wagon.
Go Lily, go!
Second heat of Chuck Wagon Racing, brought to you by Baylor College of Medicine.
Here comes the Baylor College of Medicine Chuck Wagon. Rounding the corner, it's being led by Lily.
The first horse's nose across the white line on the west side was Baylor College of Medicine.